Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and starting off our discussion by welcoming my distinguished guest, Dr. Mohamed Fahmy, the Professor of the Middle East Studies at the American University in Cairo. Dr. Fahmy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Now, we're focusing on the 156th Ordinary Session of the Arab League that was actually held in Egypt, and it was chaired by Kuwait. There were many topics discussed, many topics on the agenda, but mainly the meeting focused on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the Middle East peace process, and there were tripartite meetings that took place between Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry and the Jordanian and Iraqi counterparts as well. How do you see this tripartite meeting, and what are we really still expecting to happen, or what sort of progress do we expect or hope to see for the Middle East peace process between the two sides, the Palestinians and Israelis?
Well, I think first of all, this should be perceived as some sort of a continuation of Egypt's active role over the past few months to broker a deal between both the Palestinians and the Israelis after the most recent escalation that happened in the Gaza Strip. As you know, over the past couple of days, there have been another escalation in the attacks from Israel on the Palestinian territories. And I think it's very important for all countries involved, for the entire region, not to witness another episode of conflict and confrontation between the two sides at this juncture. So it's very important, given that currently we can also look at some sort of a reconciliation happening within the Arab region itself, between the different factions and different countries, that Egypt also capitalizes on this and its role as a leading country in the region to try and reach some sort of agreement within the different Arab nations regarding the importance of first supporting Palestine, and second, reaching some sort of a resolution, of course, for the ongoing Arab-Israeli conflict that has been going for quite some time.
Well, Egypt has really made it clear that it will work on the reconstruction of Gaza, and it really attached about $500 million for the reconstruction process, and still we're seeing airstrikes targeting the Gaza Strip as a result of, or in retaliation to the rocket that was fired from there. It is alleged that it was Hamas group that launched the rocket at Israel. What should we expect from that reconstruction? When should we expect this reconstruction to take place, when still there are rockets being fired at the Gaza Strip?
Well, it's a very delicate situation, as you know, on the Gaza Strip, because in addition to the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, there's also an internal rift within Palestine itself, between Fatah and Hamas. And this rift, which again has been going since '06 in Gaza, is one of the main reasons for the difficulty in reaching any kind of a stability or any kind of a stable solution for the situation there. Egypt, I think, over the past few years has led in a way of not really differentiating between the different factions. So despite the fact that ideology-wise Egypt is different from Hamas and what it represents in terms of its policies and in terms of its affiliation and so forth, yet Egypt has also kept a strong set of ties with Hamas leaders, because again it perceives them as Palestinian leaders rather than ideological or political groups and factions. And it is the hope in the coming period that because of this sort of reconciliation happening in the Arab region, that also the different factions in Palestine would realize the opportunity and reach some sort of agreement also. There have been several attempts and several agreements signed in Cairo and in Riyadh and in Qatar and in different places. Yet every time an agreement is signed, one of the sides, one of the groups that are affiliated with either side would breach the agreement, and then we would not reach any sort of tangible or sustainable solution. So it's really important also for the Palestinians to uphold this responsibility themselves and try and capitalize on the opportunity right now, because it's a very delicate situation. As you know, of course, in the Gaza Strip, it's a very dire economic situation, let alone the political problems there also. So it's really important for the social and economic well-being of the Palestinians, for the Palestinian factions themselves. The responsibility here lies in the hands of both Fatah and Hamas. At the same time, you also have a relatively new Israeli prime minister and government cabinet that has been sworn in a couple of months ago, and they are also eager to show that they are strict on their own national security issues, that they will not by any means be complacent with any kind of risk or threat coming from the Palestinian side. So it's expected that if an escalation happens, that they will be even more harsher than the previous governments in trying to show their strength and their prowess against the Palestinians.
Yes, well, an Israeli minister actually met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas recently. It was the first formal meeting to actually take place in a few years, who really committed himself to watching over and really taking care of the Palestinian economy as a whole. And people were starting to really be optimistic about a new sort of attitude or a new direction taken by the new Israeli government. Were people wrong to be so optimistic so soon? Was it just a political sort of formality by the new Israeli government? Or do you think that, no, this government might be a little bit different and we might progress in the right direction?
Well, in order to analyze the actions of the Israeli cabinet, we have to understand its composition. This is a coalition government, so it's very fragile in its own right. They are still kind of finding their way in terms of their policies. They're still testing the waters, if you will, with the different issues, both internal and external. The peace process, of course, is one of them. But the Israeli prime minister has mentioned more than once, and he comes from a very conservative background. He's a right-wing leader, so we should not expect him to be lenient or more appeasing than previous leaders like Netanyahu, for instance. On issues of national security, he will do his best to appear as harsh as possible. The economic and the social resolution to the Palestinian process has been proposed before, and it's an important and an integral part of the overall solution, but it's not sufficient. It does deal with one of the issues, one major issue, but it doesn't answer the whole deal. In order for there to be any kind of hope for a resolution for the conflict, it has to be multifaceted, it has to be comprehensive, including also the political issues that have been lingering on for quite some time. The refugees, the water, the borders, the Jerusalem issue, all of these, the major files that have not been yet resolved, need to be also addressed. Economic and social solutions are important, but they're only as far as they last. They're not sustainable solutions, and they do not offer a comprehensive resolution for the conflict. So again, yes, there is hope, because again, this new government does also have a participation from other forces in the Israeli society. Some of them are more accepting of the peace process and of a peaceful resolution for the conflict. But again, it will be a matter also of self-restraint and the ability of the Palestinians to show a unified side that is able to also negotiate and represent clear-cut demands. As long as this rift is still present in the Palestinian camp, it will be very difficult to reach any kind of comprehensive resolution for the conflict.
Well, the new Israeli Prime Minister has actually met today with President Sisi in the southern Sinai city of Sharm el-Sheikh, and it really shows how much weight Egypt has, and acknowledged by the new Israeli Prime Minister. But as you've mentioned, and it was a positive meeting between both leaders. Now, you've mentioned that this new government is a coalition government, and it also comprises by other political factions that are more lenient towards having a two-state solution. But still, how much of a force? Is it a really balanced sort of coalition? Are they equal in political power? Or is it still more leaning towards the conservative side of the political spectrum there?
Well, it's a fragile government in the sense that it has won the approval of the Knesset by only one member. It's a 50+1 majority. So it's a very fragile government in the sense that if only one Knesset member votes against this government, it will fall the day after. So the coalition itself is equally representative of both camps, of the right wing and the left wing, but only if it sustains itself. The agreement upon which the government was built was supposedly based on the notion of both leaders, of both camps exchanging the leadership or the position of the prime minister every 2 years. But we don't know if this government will last for more than 2 years or not. But in terms of representation internally in the different ministries, we can see, yes, it's almost an equal representation between the two camps. Whether this will sustain itself or not remains to be seen. But at this juncture, of course, I think it's doubtful if they will be able, as a government, given this weak support that they have, to give any major concessions on the issues that we're talking about. Historically, with the Israeli, policymakers, it's been those who were more powerful, like Menachem Begin initially, and later Yitzhak Rabin and others, the ones who were really powerful leaders who had a certain level of support within the Israeli polity. Those were the ones who were able to give some concessions and to be strong enough to make agreements. Whether this government will be like this or not, it remains to be seen. Maybe over the coming period they will gain more support, they will attract more allies within the Israeli Knesset. It remains to be seen. But at this point in time, it's doubtful if they will give any or make any major steps towards the peace process.
Well, whenever we hear about taking major steps and more having a favorable sort of Israeli attitude by any government, it always, the obstacle of having a division and a conflict within the Palestinian factions, the Fatah and Hamas, and then Egypt mediates, and then there's some talk of reconciliation and unity between both divisions until something happens, a rocket fired, and then we're back to square one again. Where do we stand in this cycle, and how can we actually see some sort of a lasting resolution to it, especially that Egypt now is becoming an integral part by committing itself to the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip?
Yes. Well, it's, as you said, it's a vicious cycle, and we've been there for a very long time now, again, since 2006 and afterwards. There is a bit of hope, as we were talking earlier, that there's, Palestinian factions do not operate in vacuum. They're also affected by what's happening in the Arab region, and they also have ties and links with different Arab forces. So given that there is a sense of almost a new phase that we're currently witnessing in the Arab region, more reconciliation between major forces, also different camps, this provides us with a bit of hope and a bit of optimism that it should also reflect on the Palestinian scene. That by this kind of reconciliation, we also see a manifestation of it on the Palestinian scene. But again, it's all about the Palestinians themselves. Even if they are allies with external forces, they also have the responsibility here to take ownership of their own destiny and to work on their own best interest. And it's been said for a very long time, and we know it for a very long time, that it's in their best interest to unify. We're not expecting different factions to be one. We're not expecting them to agree on all the major issues all at once, but at least reach some level of common ground upon which they can operate politically and administratively in the Gaza Strip, which is again the main source of conflict and the very sensitive and densely populated area of Palestine on the borders of both Egypt and Israel, and it's a source of conflict that has to be resolved for the benefit of all involved, including Egypt. So Egypt also has a vested interest here. It's not only a matter of regional power flexing its muscles, it's also a matter of interest, national interest for Egypt, that the resolution for the conflict of the Arab-Israeli, the Palestinian conflict, and also within Gaza itself, does represent an integral part of Egypt's national security.
Yes. Well, for decades we've always been talking about this Israeli-Palestinian conflict as the Middle East peace process, and it's part and parcel of the national security of not just Egypt, Palestine, and Israel, but also the rest of the Arab world. How true is that still now, and how is it that many other countries really depend, or it's a matter of not just an idealistic moral importance, but also a matter of national security to all the other countries?
Well, I mean, on the fight of terrorism, for instance, that for a long time we saw, because of this increasing lack of a powerful government that's able to extend its own sovereignty over the entire Palestinian district of Gaza, we saw that there were factions that went rogue and they were out of control. We saw terrorist attacks on Egypt and on other countries, and then groups having links with others, with other factions and militias like ISIL or Daesh and Al-Qaeda and other times. So definitely the security situation in the Gaza Strip is very critical, not only to the bordering countries, but to the entire region and arguably even to the rest of the world. So there is a vested interest here. But the problem is that we only, or the world only, remembers about Gaza when there is a conflict, when there are, rockets being fired or people dying, unfortunately, or civilians, like loss of life or other collateral damage. And then the issue is forgotten about. And only those who are close to it, like Egypt or others, are there to bear the brunt on the medium and long term. So I think there's kind of, international awareness also of the critical nature of the conflict and the need for there to be also an ongoing and sustainable solution. There needs to be more attention, again, given by the major powers, by the UN. We had for a while the Quartet, which was composed of Russia, the EU, the US. These groups, these powers need to, have this right in front of their eyes, that this is also a matter of international and global peace and security, and not just a regional or, related to the Arab region alone.
And since the inauguration of President Biden into office, how do you see the direction of the new U.S. administration dealing with the Israeli lobby as well taking place there? How different is it from the previous U.S. president?
Well, I mean, insufficient and lacking really to a great extent. The U.S. support to Israel will not wane anytime soon. We know that much. And regardless of the different orientations that may come from the White House, whether it's President Joe Biden or previously Trump or even the previous administration of President Obama, all of these administrations had different approaches towards the region, but there was only one constant, which is the fact that Israel is a main ally to the U.S., and this will not change, irrespective of the governments or the cabinets or the political forces that reign supreme in Israel itself. So having said that, there is still a lot to be done, and we saw before U.S. administrations pressing Israel, ever since President Nixon in the 70s, and even before that, and later Carter also in the 70s, and other leaders, there was room for the U.S. to pressure Israel on various issues. Now there is a tendency within the administration, and again it started since Obama, for the U.S. to withdraw from the region. And Afghanistan is not really that close to us, but not that far either. And what happened there is tester. It shows that there's this increase and maybe also realization on the part of the U.S. that its ability to influence international matters, international affairs, has decreased, and these resources that the U.S. has need to be utilized in the places that it's influential in the most. And it doesn't seem, the U.S., the peace process doesn't seem to be that high on their agenda at this juncture. In his campaign, Biden mentioned several times the importance of the peace process and the need for there to be a peaceful resolution to the conflict in the region, but so far nothing has been done. I mean, Blinken visited before when again there was an escalation in the region, but ever since then and ever since the alleged deal of the century that was again a failure really since it was proposed. No alternatives have been proposed yet by the current administration, and no pressure seemed to be, yielding on Israel. So far, not a lot has been happening really on that front.
Yes. Well, Still, this issue is high on the agenda of the Arab League, which really constitutes a safe haven or a backbone for the Arab nations and their crises. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.